Have you ever met a woman who commands a room without saying a single word? She doesn't argue. She doesn't explain her choices. She offers no justification for her presence. And yet, everyone around her, from colleagues to strangers, instinctively feels a line, a clear, invisible perimeter that no one dares to cross. How is this possible? What is the secret architecture of a soul that has learned to claim its own territory without wasting a single breath on defense? In this exploration, we're uncovering how truly integrated women establish an energetic boundary, one that has absolutely nothing to do with conflict or confrontation. This isn't about learning clever phrases or assertive communication tactics. This is about an internal alchemy that transforms profound stillness into unshakable sovereignty. You'll understand why some people's very presence acts as a filter, naturally repelling anything that doesn't align with their frequency. And you might just discover that you've been building this boundary yourself, perhaps without even realizing it. The boundary we're discussing isn't a brick wall. It's a resonance. It's a clarity forged in the fires of deep self-reckoning. Born from years of wrestling with her own shadow, her own truth, and her own capacity for pain. Carl Jung gave this journey a name: individuation. It is the sacred process of no longer performing as the person others expect you to be, and instead beginning to live from your absolute unfiltered core. When a woman commits to this path, something radical shifts. She stops auditioning for the approval of others. She ceases to define her worth through the distorted mirror of public opinion. And in that precise moment, a psychological fortress rises, one that is no longer permeable to external manipulation. Jung described the persona as the carefully constructed mask we wear to navigate society, to be liked, to be accepted. Most people spend their entire lives confusing this mask with their actual face. They chameleon themselves, they shrink, they please, they contort, all for the desperate need to belong, to avoid the terror of being alone. The integrated woman, however, sees this mask for what it is. She studies it, and then she gently sets it down, not as an act of defiance, not as a teenage rebellion, but simply because she understands she is done with the performance. She no longer needs to earn her right to exist, and in that simple refusal to put on a show, the boundary is instantly erected, because if you're not willing to play the game, you are by default no longer a player. There comes a point in many women's lives when they are overcome by a specific kind of exhaustion. It's not the tiredness you feel after a long day of work, it's a weariness of the soul. A bone-deep fatigue from a lifetime of self-explanation, of self-editing, of prioritizing the comfort of others over her own inner peace. This exhaustion is not a sign of failure. It is the sacred signal that a profound transformation is beginning. From this spiritual burnout, a single vital question emerges: who am I actually living this life for? And when the old answers no longer make sense, the pilgrimage back to herself truly begins. When the masks are all gone, what remains? The self. Jung called this the absolute center of the psyche, the totality of who you are. Not the ego, not your job title, not the role you play as mother, partner, or daughter. It is the indestructible essence that remains when everything artificial has been burned away. When a woman begins to live from this place, from this self, she becomes fundamentally unmanipulatable. Not because she argues or resists, but because her internal compass is so stable, so locked on, that any external attempt to pull her off course is immediately felt as a jarring dissonance. Her energetic body simply rejects it, automatically, effortlessly, without a single word of apology. Perhaps you felt this. You're in a conversation, and someone is pushing you, demanding something, expecting a certain reaction. In the past, you would have scrambled. You would have defended your position. You would have tried to make them understand. But now, Now you just feel a profound inner stillness, a quiet clarity that simply says no. Not because you are angry, not because you are trying to win, but because your entire being knows this is not your path. And so you withdraw, not with aggression, not with a slamming door. You simply retract your energy, and that is enough. The journey of individuation requires solitude, not the painful isolation of loneliness, but the profound strength of aloneness. The awakened woman has learned to embrace this state. She has walked through the empty landscapes of her own inner world and learned to be her own companion. And in that solitude, she discovers a strength that cannot be broken. Because a person who has faced their own void is no longer afraid of being alone. And a person who is not afraid of being alone can never be blackmailed, coerced, or manipulated. The silence that surrounds an integrated woman isn't empty. It's full. It's dense with awareness. It's a presence so thick you can almost touch it. When you're near her, you feel that you are in the presence of someone who is no longer seeking, no longer asking, no longer needing. This silence isn't an absence of noise, it's the presence of a deep, inner alignment that requires no external validation. It is a truth that is content with itself. And then, there is the shadow. We all have one. Jung defined it as the suitcase we all carry, packed with the parts of ourselves we were taught to despise. Our rage, our healthy selfishness, our vulnerability, our ruthlessness. For decades, she projected that shadow onto others, seeing her own bad qualities in everyone else. But the integrated woman chooses a different path. She stops. She turns around. She opens the suitcase. She looks her own darkness in the eye. And she integrates it. What happens when you integrate your shadow? The endless compulsive need to defend yourself vanishes. Why? Because you recognize in yourself the very things you used to judge in others. You know you are not just light. You know you can be difficult, selfish, and cold, and you accept this. Not as a flaw, but as part of your wholeness. In that moment, you no longer need to justify yourself. You are no longer chained to the idea of being good or nice. You are simply whole. And your no is no longer laced with anger or guilt. It is simply a fact, like gravity. For centuries, the feminine has been conditioned to be the carrier of guilt. Guilt for having needs, guilt for having anger, guilt for simply taking up space. This ancestral burden is woven into our DNA. But integrating the shadow cauterizes this wound. When a woman reclaims her right to her own anger, her own boundaries, her own healthy ego, the guilt dissolves. And without guilt, the compulsion to explain dies. She knows she doesn't need a committee's approval to say no. She knows she doesn't owe anyone a justification, and this certainty radiates from every cell in her body. In Jung's philosophy, there's a concept called enantiodromia. It describes the natural law where anything taken to its extreme will inevitably flip into its opposite. When a woman has spent a lifetime suppressing her own needs, always yielding, always understanding, always forgiving, a point comes where that submission tips over into its contrary. Not as revenge, not as bitterness, but as a natural psychic correction. The body, the soul, the self reclaims its territory, and this reclamation is non-negotiable. Picture yourself facing someone who is making an unreasonable demand. In the past, you would have felt a wave of guilt for refusing. You would have searched for polite excuses, justifications. Now, you just feel, this is not mine to hold, and you say no without an explanation, without an apology. The other person might be confused, irritated, even hurt. But that is no longer your problem because you have finally understood you are not responsible for managing the emotions of other adults. You are responsible only for your own integrity. In deep psychology and folklore, we meet the archetype of the wise old woman, or the oracle. She doesn't sit on the throne, entangled in the day-to-day politics of the court. She sits in her cave, at the edge of the kingdom, She doesn't argue. She doesn't try to convince anyone. She simply observes. And her power comes directly from this detachment. She sees clearly because she is not invested in the outcome of the drama. The integrated woman embodies this archetype. She has stepped out of the center of the fray. She doesn't need to fight, to prove, or to be in the mix. She knows her clarity is found in her distance. This withdrawal isn't an escape. It's not a fear of confrontation. It is energetic curation. She consciously chooses where to direct her focus, where to invest her time, who to share her vibration with. Jung taught that individuation requires the protection of one's inner space. The awakened woman understands this on a cellular level. Her inner life is sacred. It's the temple where she meets herself, where she finds her truth, where she regenerates her power. And she will not allow that space to be contaminated by external demands that do not align with her essence. When you learn to protect your energy, you also learn to direct it. The awakened woman knows her life force is precious. It is not an infinite resource. It only regenerates in the quiet, in the solitude, in the retreat. So she stops giving it away indiscriminately. She invests it with intention, into relationships that nourish her, into work that gives her meaning, into moments that make her feel alive. Everything else simply falls away, not through a dramatic fight, but through a natural, quiet selection. What is a boundary? A boundary is the preservation of what is essential. It is not a rejection of the other. It is a profound yes to oneself. When you say no to something that drains you, you are simultaneously saying yes to what replenishes you. The awakened woman has learned to hear that yes. She has learned to listen to the quiet whisper inside her that knows what is right and what is wrong for her. And she follows that voice, even when others don't understand, even when others are disappointed, even when she is judged for it. The body always speaks the truth, even when the lips are silent. The awakened woman communicates her boundaries through her very presence, her posture, her micro-expressions, the density of her energy. Carl Jung believed we exist within energetic fields that constantly interact. When you are in the field of an integrated woman, you feel it. It's calm, it's clear, and it's impermeable, not because she is rejecting you, but because she is so completely with herself that there is no room left for anything that does not belong. She has learned to manage this energetic field. She doesn't let just anyone in. Not every emotion, not every demand, not every drama. Her field is dense enough to protect what must be protected, and this doesn't happen through straining or effort. It happens through clarity, through the simple decision to no longer be reactive. Because when she stops reacting to provocations, to manipulations, to accusations, she creates a kind of vacuum. And this vacuum is powerful. The person trying to breach her peace finds no resistance. And without resistance, there's nothing to push against, nothing to grab onto. Have you ever been in that moment? Someone is trying to get a rise out of you, and you just remain still. You don't react. You don't defend. You don't explain. You just stay centered in yourself. And suddenly the other person realizes their efforts are landing in a void. There's no emotion to hook into, no insecurity to exploit, and in that void lies your power. The gaze of the awakened woman is different. It's steady but not aggressive. It's present but not available. She looks at you, but she does not give herself to you. It's a look that says, I see you, but I belong to me. This gaze alone establishes a boundary that words never could, because in that gaze lies a clarity that everyone can feel. A sovereignty that leaves no room for doubt. In the ancient wisdom of archetypes, we find the queen, not the ruler who governs by force, but the woman who creates order by her being. She doesn't have to do anything. She doesn't have to proclaim her power. Her presence is enough. The awakened woman embodies this archetype. She doesn't need to prove herself. She doesn't need to assert her will. She simply is. And that simplicity, that self-evident way she stands in her own truth, is more powerful than any argument. In Jungian alchemy, there is a process called mortificatio, the symbolic killing. It is the death of what no longer serves, the death of false identities, the death of inauthentic relationships. The awakened woman must pass through this. She lets die what no longer belongs to her, not with drama, not with confrontation, but with a quiet withdrawal of her life force. She stops watering dead plants. She stops investing in connections built on false promises or old compromises. There was a time when you might have believed you had to save relationships, that you had to adapt so others would stay, that you had to silence your truth to avoid hurting someone. The awakened woman has left this belief behind. She knows that some relationships must die so that she herself can truly live, and she allows this to happen, without guilt, without regret, with the calm certainty that what is real will always remain, the invisible contract. So many relationships are based on this unspoken pact. I will be the person you need me to be, and in return you will give me validation. The awakened woman tears up this contract. She is no longer seeking validation. She doesn't need an external mirror to tell her who she is. And this breach of contract is felt as a profound loss by others. Not the loss of her as a person, but the loss of the function she served, the loss of the mirror she held up, the loss of the energy she provided. When a woman withdraws, the other person often experiences a form of grief, but it's not grief for her. It's grief for what she represented, the role she played, the validation she gave, and that grief belongs to them, not to you. You are not responsible for someone missing the version of you that you contorted yourself to be. The dissolution is natural. There's no spectacular explosion, no loud breakup. There is only a gradual stepping back, a presence that becomes less and less available, an energy that slowly recedes, until the relationship dissolves on its own, starved of the emotional fuel it needed to survive. The awakened woman doesn't force it. She allows things to take their natural course, and that, perhaps, is the most radical boundary of all, the one that sets itself simply because it is no longer being fed. Jung spoke of synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences that occur when we are living in alignment with the self. The awakened woman sees these synchronicities daily. People who no longer match her vibration simply fade out of her life. Situations that would have caused her stress dissolve before they can touch her. It's as if the universe itself is conspiring to help her maintain her boundaries. Not because she is forcing it, but because her internal clarity is creating an external order. Have you ever noticed that? How some people just drift away without a big fight? How relationships just end because you stopped being the only one holding them together? That isn't an accident. That is the natural consequence of your own inner clarity. You are no longer clinging to what doesn't fit, and what doesn't fit naturally falls away. The awakened woman doesn't use boundaries as a technique. She is the boundary. Her psychic structure has matured to a point where it simply cannot tolerate invasion anymore. It's no longer possible, not because she fights, but because she knows herself so completely that she instantly senses what is not her. And she acts from that clarity, without doubt, without justification, without guilt. This sovereignty isn't something you can learn in a weekend workshop. It is the result of a long, internal process. Years of wrestling with yourself, years of doubt, years of pain, years of solitude, years of meeting your shadow, your truth, your essence. And then one day, without you even noticing, you arrive. You are at home in yourself, and from that place you set boundaries without thinking. Because it is the only way you know how to live. There is a quality to the presence of an awakened woman that is hard to describe. She is neither warm nor cold. neither inviting nor repelling. She is simply there, rooted. This quality doesn't come from practice. It comes from release, from letting go of everything that is not authentic, from embracing everything that is. And in that authenticity lies a power that no one can breach. Jung said that the unconscious perceives truths that the conscious mind has not yet formulated. When a woman lives in her quiet sovereignty, she resonates at a frequency that other people's unconscious minds understand immediately. There are no words, but there is a resonance, or a lack of it. And people feel that. They feel they cannot cross that line, not because they are being pushed away, but because the frequencies simply don't match. Maybe as you've been listening, you've recognized yourself. Maybe you already are this woman. Maybe you already hold this line. Withdraw this energy and say no with your silence. And perhaps the only thing left to do is to stop feeling guilty about it, to stop feeling bad, to stop believing you need a reason to stay true to yourself. When one woman lives in her sovereignty, she activates a permission slip in the collective unconscious for other women to do the same. She doesn't have to teach. She doesn't have to preach. She just has to be. And her being becomes the message, the invitation, the proof that it is possible to set boundaries without saying a word. The boundary is not separation. It is the protection of what is sacred. It is the preservation of your inner temple. It is the yes to yourself that doesn't need to be a no to anyone else. It is the clarity that comes from the deep, the stillness that is born from meeting yourself. And it is the most powerful form of communication there is. What would happen if you just stopped explaining? What if you just walked away when something no longer felt right? What if you pulled back your energy without announcement, without justification? What if you understood that your silence is not weakness but is, in fact, the clearest statement you can possibly make? The awakened woman is not the one who speaks the loudest. She is the one who listens the deepest to herself. And in that internal silence, she finds a strength that words can never touch, a strength that comes from integrating all parts of yourself, from accepting your shadow, from connecting to yourself, from the clarity of your own individuation. You are not required to please everyone. You are not required to be available to everyone. You are not required to explain, justify, or apologize for your existence. You are only required to be true to yourself. And if that means you must withdraw, then withdraw. If that means you must say no, then say no. If that means you must be silent, then be silent. The world may not always understand you. People may be disappointed. They may call you cold, distant, or selfish. Let them, because you know what they don't. That your boundary is not rejection, that your silence is not indifference, that your retreat is not an escape. You know that you are simply finally at home with yourself. And that is the most sacred place you can be. Jung once said that the process of individuation is the most dangerous journey a person can undertake. Dangerous because it strips you of everything you thought you were. It leaves you alone with yourself. It forces you to shed everything that is false. But at the end of that journey, something awaits that is worth all the fear. You, whole, undivided, sovereign, and from that place you no longer need words to set boundaries. Your very being is the boundary. Your clarity is the message. Your silence is the most powerful statement you will ever make. Perhaps it's time to recognize that you are already this woman, that you already hold this boundary, that you already live this sovereignty, and that the only thing still missing is the permission you give to yourself, the permission to stop explaining why you are the way you are. If you've listened this far, you know that this message didn't find you by accident. Something in you was searching for this confirmation. Something in you needed to hear that it's okay to be this way. That it's not just okay, it's necessary. That your boundary is not a defect, but the very sign of your maturity. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to go deeper. If you're ready to hear the truth about who you are. If you're ready to set down the masks and meet the person underneath. And leave a comment if you recognized yourself in this. Write if you are already living this boundary, or if you are just beginning to discover it. Because every time a woman speaks her truth, she gives silent permission for others to do the same. And that is perhaps the most valuable gift we can give each other. The permission to be ourselves, without words, without justification, simply